Hello, welcome to this biology session where we'll be going over chapter 30 in the textbook, which is part of lesson 5 in your biology course. So this chapter is about the digestive system and the excretory systems. So it starts out by describing organ systems in general and their tissues. So to review the levels of organization in living things, you have cells, and specialized cells in a group together make tissues. Tissues are groups of cells that have a job to do. So they're all specialized and they do something specific, and different tissues can work together as organs. And then different organs work together to make up an organ system, in this case the digestive system. We're looking at 4 different types of tissues that have important functions in the human body. You have epithelial tissues that are coverings. The skin is an epithelial tissue, but so is the lining of different organs. And it protects the body or protects the organs. And it also has some other functions. So your skin helps maintain your temperature. If you get too hot or too cold and your body has to change that, the skin has a few different ways to help that happen. The next tissue is called connective tissue. These are tissues that provide support for the body and connect its parts together. They often contain a protein called collagen, which keeps the tissues strong and durable. And the category connective tissues also includes some other tissues like fat cells and blood cells and bone cells. So all those cells make up tissues that are just grouped in with connective tissues. Then we have nervous tissue. This is cells that carry nerve signals, and nerve signals are called impulses. These tissues make up the brain and the spinal cord and the nerves, and their job is to recognize and respond to changes in the environment or changes within the body. And then muscle tissues. Muscle tissues create movement, and you have skeletal muscles are voluntary, meaning that you move them on purpose. But then you also have many involuntary muscles. And we're going to be looking at those in your digestive system that work without you being conscious of it. So they move, they contract, but you don't have to think about making that happen. And if you're thinking, wait, I thought this chapter was about the digestive system, why are we talking about all these tissues? I'm happy to inform you that the digestive system contains all of these tissues. The mouth, esophagus, stomach, and intestines, they all have muscles and are lined by epithelial tissue. The internal organs are kept in place by the connective tissue, and you have nervous tissue in all of those organs. Now, one last thing about organ systems is that page 716 has this great chart that summarizes the function and the structure of each organ system in the human body. So it gives you the name of the system, the structures that are in it, and what it does. So you definitely want to refer to this chart on this page when you're doing practice questions, when you're doing your test. Anytime that it asks you about a specific organ system, this is a great place to start, page 716. Now, one big important thing that your body does is called homeostasis. Homeostasis is the maintenance of stable conditions in your body. Body controls a lot of factors and has to keep them within a certain range to stay alive. An example is temperature. Your internal body temperature always hovers around 98 degrees because if it gets much colder or hotter, certain things stop functioning. So your body maintains a temperature around 98 degrees even if the air around you is warmer or colder than that. Temperature is just one example. There are many conditions that your body must control to maintain homeostasis. The one way that it does this is called feedback inhibition. So feedback inhibition is when your body starts a process, senses the response to that process, and the response is actually what signals the body to stop the process. So let's kind of just look at an example before we see how it's used in your body. So if you have body part number 1 and body part number 2, and these might be just certain tissues or certain cells, and number 1 releases a signal that it sends to number 2, and that tells number 2 to make a bunch of these number 3s, so these little triangle things. And the number 3s might be used for something else, but they also go and block number 1, so it can't send any more of these signals. So this would be happening thousands or millions of times at the same time because you have lots of cells doing the same thing in your body. So you have lots of cells that are going to be producing these signals that are going to make the other one, make these products, this number 3 product, and those products are going to be used, but when there's excess products, they would go back and block number 1, so it would have to stop sending the signals. So once you get a buildup of products and there's millions of extras, they'll have blocked up all of the number 1 places, and there won't be able to be any more made. So that is how feedback inhibition works. The process started over here with this one, and the result was making these things, these number 3s, and that's what went back and inhibited the process, what stopped the process. So it's the feedback that inhibits the process, feedback inhibition. Okay, so that is just kind of an example of how it works, and then how it works in your body. There's tons of different feedback inhibition pathways in your body. One that it talks about is just the temperature again. Okay, so the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that maintains homeostasis. If the body temperature is too hot, the hypothalamus starts a process to help the body lose heat. And it monitors the body temperature. And once the temperature has decreased enough, the hypothalamus senses this and it stops the heat loss process. Another example of feedback inhibition is the way that the liver adjusts the body's blood sugar levels. So the liver stores glucose inside so that there's not too much glucose in the blood. If the amount of glucose in the blood drops too low, the liver starts releasing it. And when the amount of glucose in the blood is correct, it signals the liver to stop releasing it, and it just keeps storing it again. So it's another way that the body maintains homeostasis through the process of feedback inhibition. So let's review section 1 before we move on. We have this review question. The body has to maintain constant internal conditions to keep you alive, even if the environmental changes. This is called what? Give you a few seconds to think about it. Okay, this is called homeostasis, maintaining constant internal conditions. And one more review. What page of the textbook has a chart with the functions of all the organ systems? Now, there's no multiple choice, but you should write down somewhere or bookmark it. It's page 716. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few page numbers throughout this presentation where you've got different charts to look at. I guarantee you those will be helpful. You should remember where they are, look at them when you get stuck, when you have test questions about those topics. Okay, so section 2 is about the digestive system, and it starts with basically explaining why we need to eat. So some molecules in food contain energy that your body needs to function. Cellular respiration turns that energy into ATP, which can fuel the cellular functions. Then there's some molecules in food that are used as building blocks for your body's tissues. There are at least 45 different substances that your body needs, but it cannot make itself. So it's important to eat a variety of food. People that eat the same food every day can end up being malnourished, where they're getting enough food, but they're missing some of those 45 different things. In general, this is what the body needs to intake in order to keep you living. You need water, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. We're going to talk about each one. So water is very important. It's needed for every cell. There's water inside of cells. There's water around all of your cells. Chemical reactions often need to happen in water. You need the substances to be dissolved in water so that they can react. You have blood that has a lot of water in it, other bodily fluids that have a lot of water in it, and you need water in order to help you remove waste. So urine and sweat remove waste from your body, and you need to have enough water to do that. Next one's carbohydrates. So you have sugars and starches, which are broken down to use as fuel for cellular respiration. So the body does need some sugars and starches to be able to do that. However, excess is stored temporarily as a substance called glycogen in the liver, but then long-term excess sugar gets stored as fat. So modern diets have way too much sugar. Our generations are eating more sugar than any time in human history before this. So everyone should probably try to be conscientious of limiting their sugar intake. You need some, but not as much as most people get on a daily basis. Another type of carbohydrate is cellulose, which you will see called dietary fiber when you're talking about nutrition. So the cellulose or fiber is something that your body can't break down, but you need it for digestion. It actually helps you poop. There's also soluble fiber that also seems to be helpful for reducing the risk of heart disease. It is still being researched, but soluble fiber may help get rid of molecules that cause heart disease. So it's a good idea to eat a lot of foods that have fiber in general, and definitely also keep an eye out for foods that have a lot of soluble fiber, which is usually a lot of fruits, and I know oatmeal has soluble fiber. Next one is fats. Fats are used in cell membranes, in your nerve cells, hormones, and for absorbing some vitamins. They can't dissolve in water and they dissolve in fat. But you don't need a lot of fat for this, and so again, modern diets usually involve consuming more fat than the body needs. So it's a good idea to limit the intakes of both fats and sugars. So important thing about fat is their structure. So there's two basic types. You have saturated and unsaturated. So saturated fats are like this. There's no double bonds. They just have single carbon bonds, and that makes for a straight line. So they can pack together really closely, and those end up being solid fats. So things like butter have a lot of saturated fats. Then you have unsaturated, which is almost exactly the same thing, except that they have this going on. They've got some double bonds, and that's going to make for bends in this whole chain. And that means that they can't get close enough together to be pressed into a solid. So unsaturated fats are usually liquids. So those would be things like oils, like cooking oil, vegetable oil. You'll also hear a lot in the news about trans fats, and those are unsaturated fats that are a little bit messed up. Instead of having these H's up here and then nothing down here, they'll have an H up here and then another H on this side. And we're not really going to get into it, but they are harder for your body to deal with and digest than regular unsaturated fats. And there's a lot of evidence that that is what leads to a lot of heart disease and problems with the circulatory system. Okay, so long story short, you need a little bit of fats in your body for these reasons, but again, most people have too much, and then there's some types that are okay and some types that are not good for you. The next nutrient that your body needs is proteins. Proteins are really important. They are used for tons of cellular functions. remember that DNA, its whole job is to code for proteins, and the proteins do all the work for the cell. Okay, so we need proteins for lots of things. And we mostly associate proteins with muscle tissue because they have a lot of protein in it to make the muscles move. And this on the left is a diagram showing all of the amino acids. There are 20 different amino acids, and those get put together in different combinations to make all of the different proteins in the body. And then we have vitamins and minerals. So vitamins are organic molecules that the body needs in very small amounts. They can help with chemical reactions. And there's some of them that can't be stored in the body and they should be eaten every day. So that's why there's a lot of vitamins that are sold to be eaten every day. But studies have found that those are not as effective as actually eating a food that contains the vitamins. So for some reason or another, it's your body absorbs them better and uses them better if you're getting them from a food instead of from these pills. So this also right here, this is vitamin B12, just to give you an idea that some of them are really complex molecules, and they're all organic molecules. That was the difference between vitamins and minerals. So vitamins are organic, and that means they're molecules that have carbon atoms in them. Okay, they have carbon, and again, they're usually kind of complex. Minerals, however, are inorganic molecules, so they do not have carbon, and they are also just molecules that your body needs in small amounts, but they might be a little bit less complex. Things like calcium and iron, those are just elements, but your body uses them and uses them inside of more complex molecules. And the section ends with just talking about nutrition and the idea that a balanced diet is going to be different for everyone. So what you should eat every day, what your body requires you to eat, is going to be different for different people based on their age, based on their gender, and based on the amount of physical activity in their life. So someone that only moves around a little bit during the day versus someone that has a job requiring a lot of physical activity, or that just exercises a lot, they're going to have different requirements for their body. But in general, everybody should probably be limiting the intakes of fats and sugar, eating a variety of healthy foods, because remember, you need to intake lots of different vitamins and minerals, so you get different ones from eating different foods, and getting some exercise, at least 30 minutes of exercise a day. All right, review for this section. What happens to excess sugar that's in your body? So does it help you poop? Is it stored as fat? Is it removed or used to remove waste in urine or performing cellular functions? Well, our answer is it's stored as fat. So a little bit of sugar is necessary. It's what is broken down for energy in your body, but the extra is stored as fat. And these other things are the other molecules that we talked about. So cellulose, also called fiber, is what helps you poop. Water is what is able to remove the waste in urine, and it's proteins that perform many, many cellular functions. All right, the next section is about the digestive system. Okay, so there's 4 main steps to digesting food. You have ingestion, digestion, absorption, and elimination. So ingestion is taking food into the body. Whoops. Okay, ingestion is taking food into the body, and this only happens in your mouth. Then immediately starts digestion. Digestion is breaking down the food from big chunks of food into big molecules into small molecules. And then once you've broken down into the point that the body could use them for different cellular functions, they need to get from the digestive system into the bloodstream. And that's done in a process called absorption. And then finally, elimination is the process of getting the leftovers out of the body. So in your mouth, your teeth start what's called mechanical digestion, physically breaking apart the large pieces of food. But this is also where chemical digestion starts. Saliva contains an enzyme called amylase, which begins chemical reactions that break up food. The esophagus is a tube that pushes food from the mouth to the stomach with involuntary muscles. This process of squeezing the muscles to push down the food is called peristalsis. Okay, the food arrives in the stomach and chemical digestion continues in the stomach. The stomach makes hydrochloric acid and makes an enzyme called pepsin that breaks protein into smaller pieces. It makes mucus, which lubricates the food as it moves and protects the food from, protects the stomach lining from the acid, so the stomach's acid doesn't hurt itself. The stomach muscles contract, and the contractions mix all of this up, and so you get a mixture of food and pepsin acid that leaves the stomach, and that is called chyme. It leaves the stomach and goes into the small intestine, and this is where most of the digestion actually happens, in the small intestine, specifically in an area of it called the duodenum. So the chyme, which is the food mixture, enters the beginning of the small intestine called the duodenum. This has more enzymes and digestive fluids. And here what happens is the macromolecules, which are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, all of these are broken down by the enzymes that were produced in the pancreas and then delivered to this area. There's also bile that came from the liver and gallbladder, and that acts as an aid for digesting fats. So now once the food is digested, the useful molecules need to be absorbed. And then we need to get them from the digestive system into the bloodstream so they could go to all the cells and be useful. So the small intestine is lined with structures called villi, which increase the surface area. And all they are is these structures along the lining of the small intestine that stick up, and they just provide all this extra surface area for the chyme to come into contact with it, and then they will absorb all the nutrients from the chyme. Okay, so it's lined with villi, which increases the surface area. This allows for efficient absorption of all the nutrients into the lining of the small intestine. By the time it is through the small intestine, the chyme has no nutrients left, just water and cellulose and some other undigestible substances. So there's another chart to pay attention to. This is on page 725. In this chart, it talks all about digestive enzymes. It tells you where they are, what the name of the enzyme is, and what it does. So again, another important chart to refer to when you're answering questions about enzymes. So once the chyme leaves the small intestine, again, all of the nutrients have been absorbed out of it and goes to the large intestine, where the main job of the large intestine is to remove the water from the chyme. It also has bacteria that help break material down further. So there's cellulose here that can't be digested by your organs, but the bacteria help break it down. And these bacteria also produce vitamin K for you, which is pretty nice of them. All right, at this point, the material is no longer called chyme, it is called feces. And from the end of the large intestine is elimination, the scientific word for pooping. That's it for section 3. So we have some review questions. So I'll let you think about this one for a minute. Match the organ on the left with the correct function in green on the right. Okay, so the first one's esophagus. What does the esophagus do? It pushes food into the stomach from the mouth. And then the stomach, it mixes food with chemicals for digestion. Remember the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin and the food all get mixed together, and now it's called chyme. Then what does the small intestine do? It absorbs the nutrients from digested food, and then the large intestine absorbs the water from the chyme, and then eliminates the feces. One more for section 3. Which of these 3 things is not a chemical that digests food? So we have pepsin, amylase, villi, or hydrochloric acid. Okay, so those are all chemicals that digest food except for villi. Villi, remember, are the structures in the small intestine, the little bumps on the lining of the small intestine that help absorb nutrients from the food. And chapter 30.4 is the excretory system. This is how your body gets rid of waste products. So you might not think of this when you consider the body parts that are very important, that you need to stay alive, but this process is actually very, very important. Waste products can be toxic, and so they need to be eliminated from your body. They can also just get in the way of normal functions, so they need to be eliminated. You need to clear them out of there. So these organs are part of the excretory system. We have the skin and the lungs and the liver and the kidneys. And some of you might be thinking, skin and lungs? How is that excretory? I know what those do. Those don't get rid of garbage, but they actually do. The skin is responsible for sweating, which gets rid of extra salts and some other materials. And the lungs get rid of carbon dioxide. So we know the lungs are important for taking in oxygen, but your body also needs to get rid of the excess carbon dioxide. So the lungs do that too. Then you have the liver. Its main job is to convert ammonia, which is toxic, into urea, which is less bad. And the kidney's job is to take that urea and then take other waste from the blood and excess water, turn it all into urine and get rid of it. Okay, so those are the 4 important parts of the excretory system, but we're actually just going to focus on the kidneys for the rest of the chapter. So the kidneys have units in them called nephrons that filter out wastes from the blood and then send the clean blood back to the circulatory system. Okay, so let's see how that actually works. So this image is showing you've got a whole kidney over here, got a whole kidney, and the nephron is that little part of the kidney. And now we're going to go even more in depth. Inside of the nephrons are networks of capillaries called the glomerulus. Capillaries are very, very tiny blood vessels. So when the blood gets to the glomerulus, the water and small dissolved substances can get inside of it, and the blood cells and the large proteins are stuck outside. Then in the glomerulus, where you have water and some dissolved substances. Some of the water and the good molecules are reabsorbed and sent back to the rest of the blood. And then they return to circulation. But the toxins and other waste products are not reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. Those are left behind. So these things that remain, and there's water that remains behind with them, is called urine, and that's what's excreted. Okay, and kidneys also control the water content of the body, and they control the pH of the blood. So remember, pH is how acidic or basic something is. So your blood needs to be slightly acidic, but only a little bit. So the kidneys control this, and it's done through feedback inhibition. So the contents of the blood reaching the kidney will determine what the kidneys do. If there's too much salt in the blood, they will remove salt in the blood. If there's too much glucose, they will remove glucose from the blood. If there's the right amount of each of those, they stop removing it. Hormones can also control what kidneys do. For example, there's a hormone called ADH, and it tells the kidneys when to reabsorb more water back into circulation and when to stop absorbing water. And then our last section here is about diseases and disorders of the kidneys. So you have kidney stones. Kidney stones form when minerals or salts in the urine crystallize and build into stones that look like this. They can actually get pretty big. So normally those things are just taken away in very small amounts in the water, but they can build up and crystallize. And if this happens, they can block the path to the bladder, which is called a ureter, and cause a great deal of pain to the person that has them. Damage to kidneys can be caused by many different diseases and disorders and injuries and certain drugs. And kidney failure is when damage is so bad that the kidneys can no longer function. So during kidney failure, the homeostasis cannot be maintained. And if homeostasis cannot be maintained, then you die. So a person can't live with kidney failure unless they get something to help them maintain homeostasis. So there's two options for that. A kidney transplant, where they get a working kidney from someone else and put it into the body, or dialysis, which is a process in which the blood is pumped out of the body, pumped through a filtration machine that does the job of the kidney, and then pumped back into the body. So it can skip the kidney and go out of the body and be filtered. And that's it for section 30.4. So we have a couple of quick review questions. Which organ of these four organs, which one filters salt and glucose and other molecules out of the blood? Is that the liver, the kidneys, the ureter, or the lungs? Okay, and that would be kidneys. The ureter is actually not an organ on its own. It's part of the kidneys. It's the path that takes the urine to the bladder. And we have one more review about these. So which organ here converts ammonia into urea? Liver, kidneys, nephron, or lungs? Okay. The answer there is going to be the liver. So we just found out what the kidneys do. Nephron is part of the kidneys. Remember, that's the part where the filtration happens. And the lungs, their job is to get rid of carbon dioxide and to bring in oxygen. And one more review question. Kidneys are controlled by feedback inhibition. They filter things out of the blood based on how much of that substance is in the blood, the urine, the liver, or the sweat. So remember, feedback inhibition The result of the process is what controls whether the process happens. So they filter things out of the blood based on, based on how much of the substance is in the blood. So remember, if there's a lot of salt in the blood, then they'll take salt out of the blood. If there's a lot of glucose in the blood, they'll take glucose out of the blood. If they're taking glucose out of the blood and then blood starts coming to the kidneys and it now has normal amounts of glucose, then they stop taking glucose out of the blood. So that is it for this chapter, chapter 30. If you do have any questions about this section, here's how you can contact your instructor. And we'd love to hear from you and love to see you at another webinar.